Combat in D&D can be a difficult, tedious encounter if you don't know what you're doing. Thankfully for you, you have found this video, which will start to go through everything you need to know with a whole load of tips and tricks to make it easier and more fun. If you find any of this helpful, please do like and subscribe and let me know what else you want to see. So today we will be going over the stats, the roles, the proficiencies, and then we'll look at weapons and armour. Next week we'll do a full-on combat encounter explaining each and every step in doing your turn. Then finally I'll do a spellcasting tutorial the week after just to round out everything that could be happening in combat. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss those. Before we get going in earnest, I want to quickly cover some terms that I'll use in the video. For example, when I say D and then a number, I mean a dice with that many sides, so a D8 would be an 8-sided die and a D20 would be a 20-sided die. I might also say that you can roll a natural 20 or a natural 1. This simply means the result on the dice was a 20 or a 1 before you added any modifier. On that thought, modifiers are the numbers that you can add to your dice roll. I went over those in more detail in my last two tutorials, which are on my channel, so do check those out. I may also mention advantage or disadvantage on a roll. That simply means that you can do the roll twice, and if you have advantage you take the higher option, and if you have disadvantage you take the lower option. Finally, I will mention proficiency, which just means something that your character is good at. This can be using a weapon, or wearing armour, or an ability. And it means that the modifier that you use when you're doing that ability or using that item gets an extra bonus depending on your level. There are some very important numbers that you'll need to know for your combat encounters. These are your hit points, your speed, your initiative modifier, your saving throws, and finally any numbers that are linked to your armour or the weapons that you are using. We'll go through each of these in detail just so you get a good idea about how to calculate them yourself. So for HP, you'll need to know your level, your class, and your constitution modifier. Each class has a particular hit dice. For example, a rogue gets a D8. And each level you get in that relative class will increase your HP by a value linked to that hit dice. This can mean one of three methods. Firstly, you could take the maximum of that roll, so for a rogue that would be 8. Or you can take the average, rounded up, that would be 5 in this case. Finally, you can actually just roll the dice and take that number and add that to your HP. Often we say that 1s aren't funs and so you can re-roll any 1. After that, you will be able to add your constitution modifier to your HP each level to give yourself a little bit of a beefiness if you have a high constitution character. As an example for all this, if you're a level 5 rogue with no constitution modifier, you could have 40 HP if you took the maximum at every level, 25 if you took the average, or you could have anything from 28 to 40 if you took the maximum HP for the first 3 levels and then rolled after that, re-rolling once. Whereas HP is linked to your class, your speed is linked to your species. Whenever you choose a species, you will be assigned a speed. This speed can be increased by class abilities or magic items, but for now we'll focus on your base speed, which is mostly 30 foot or 25 foot for most of the playable species. This is how far you can move in one turn of combat, which we will talk about more next week, but in essence, this is how fast you can move in 6 seconds. So now you've got your HP, your speed, and now we need to look at your initiative modifier. This is how quickly you react when a combat starts. This is usually linked to your dexterity modifier, and will be the same as your dexterity modifier unless you have a class ability or special ability that changes this. For the majority of characters, you can just rewrite your dexterity modifier as your initiative modifier. Next, we are going to look at your saving throws. These are rolls that you may be asked to roll in response to an enemy's action, such as a spell being cast on you. You can make a saving throw in any of the 6 abilities, and you simply add your modifier for that ability. However, each class is also proficient in 2 of these saving throws, and so you can add your proficiency bonus as well when you roll those particular saving throws. You need to note these down when you start to create a character, so you can find them quickly when you need to. So now we'll look at armour, and this is all centred around your AC. Your AC or armour class is a number that an enemy will need to beat on a roll in order to hit you. So you want this to be as high as possible. If you're wearing no armour, then your AC is simply 10 plus your dexterity modifier, as this symbolises how good you are at dodging. You can increase your AC further though by wearing armour, or by having a class feature that lets you improve it. We'll just look at armour today, as class features will be covered in future videos, so do make sure you check those out. There are 3 possible levels of armour: light, medium and heavy. Heavy gives the most protection, but not all classes are proficient in it, and if you are not proficient in the armour, you don't gain the benefits. You'll need to check the proficiencies for each class to make sure that you have the right armour for your character. Each piece of armour will give you the possible AC that it grants you in its description. Most light armour gives you an AC of 11 plus your dexterity modifier, but you can pay more gold to get studded light armour, which boosts that to 12 plus dexterity. Medium armor ranges from 13 to 15 AC plus your dexterity modifier, but this caps out as an increase of 2. So if you have very good dexterity, then you should probably stick with light armor. The higher AC armors in medium also start to have the fallback of giving you disadvantage on stealth checks. Finally, heavy armor gives you the higher ACs, even up to 18, but this does not allow you to add any dexterity. They also have the stealth drawback, as I mentioned before, and the strongest armors can slow you down and reduce your speed by 10 foot if you are not strong enough to carry it. You can also carry a shield to boost up your AC. The basic shield increases your AC by 2, but it does require a free hand in order to carry it. So now we've gone through your basic stats and your armor, we are going to look at your attack rolls. This is slightly different between weapon attacks and spell attacks, so we'll do one and then the other, and we're going to start with regular weapons. So all regular weapon attacks have 2 phases. In the first phase, you'll roll a dice to try and hit the enemy. This roll is always a d20, and the modifier will depend on the type of weapon you're using. Most weapons are strength based, and so you will add your strength modifier to the roll, but there are some what we call finesse weapons, and for these you can add your dexterity. You can then add your proficiency modifier if you are proficient with that weapon type. There are 2 categories of weapons, and your character's class will determine whether or not you're proficient in one or in both of these categories. The first category is simple weapons, and this includes things like clubs. The second category is martial weapons, which include swords, rapiers and crossbows and things like that. Double check which categories your class is proficient in so that you can choose a good weapon for your character to have. The second phase of the attack happens if you are successful with the first, and it involves rolling for the damage that you deal. Each weapon you select has a specified damage type and a damage die. We will look at damage types later on in a future video, but for here it is important to know the damage die for your weapon. When you hit with that weapon, you will roll that damage die, and then you can add your ability modifier for the ability that you use to attack. Unfortunately, you are not able to add your proficiency to this roll. On the magic side, it is very similar as for weapon attacks, except that instead of using dexterity or strength to attack, you are using a particular ability that the class uses for their spellcasting. This is one of wisdom, intelligence or charisma. The spell attack bonus is simply the relevant ability modifier score plus your proficiency. However, some spells don't require you to actually hit them, but instead require the enemy to roll a saving throw to avoid it. Therefore, you need a spell difficulty class, a number that they'll need to beat on their saving throw to avoid the effects of the spell. You can calculate this difficulty class with the following sum: 8 plus your spellcasting ability modifier plus your proficiency. The damage from spells is generally easy as it is normally set out in the spell's description. We'll go through spells in more detail in a future video, so we'll leave it at this for now. So now that we've done all the attack rolls, we're going to go back quickly to physical weapons, as there are a few other traits which they may have which will change how you use them. We'll split these into categories to make it easier for you. The first category is simple or martial, which we have mentioned above. The second category is melee or ranged. The difference here is quite self-explanatory, with melee weapons being the ones that you have to hold while they hit the enemy, rather than ranged, which can hit them from a distance. The range from which you can hit any weapon is set out in the weapon's description. This is mostly 5 foot for melee weapons, but can sometimes expand to 10 foot for weapons that have reach, whereas ranged weapons have quite the range of ranges. This will be split into a lower number and a higher number. The lower number is the number of feet that you can hit easily from, and therefore you just roll normally. You can extend yourself though to the higher range, but this will mean you have to roll with disadvantage to hit. One final thing to mention is that the default skill for ranged weapons is dexterity, like finesse weapons, and therefore you don't need to have good strength. The next category is heavy or light. Heavy weapons tend to deal more damage, but require higher strength or dexterity to use, depending on if they are melee or ranged. Light weapons, on the other hand, allow you to make a second attack in your turn with a different light weapon. This second attack is weaker, as you didn't add your ability modifier to the second roll, but it's still useful to have the extra damage. As I've mentioned, melee weapons can be finesse, allowing you to use dexterity instead of strength to attack with them, but some small melee weapons can also be thrown, giving them a small range to attack from a distance. But you have to remember that once you throw it, you do have to go pick it up, otherwise you can't use it again. Some other melee weapons are two-handed, meaning they require 2 hands to use. This will stop you from using a shield or from holding a second weapon in your other hand, but it's more likely that they do more damage. Some weapons can be versatile, which means they can either be one-handed or two-handed, with the two-handed version of the attacks dealing more damage. Finally, a lot of ranged weapons require ammunition that gets fired, and some others require the ammunition to be loaded, limiting the amount of attacks you can do in a turn to 1. A final thing to mention is Mastery, which was introduced in 2024 and includes additional abilities for each weapon that someone who is trained to a master level in that weapon can use. These include slowing down a creature, gaining advantage on future attacks or giving them disadvantage, making it easier to make a second attack with the weapon, or pushing and toppling a creature over. So that is everything for today. Please tune in next week where we will be going over doing turns, playing an entire combat encounter and all the conditions you can have. I will see you then, and if you have enjoyed, please do like and subscribe.